I still remember the exact moment my heart broke for the first time. I was 17 years old, standing in the hallway of Westbrook High School, holding a small folded note in my sweaty palm. My backpack was too heavy, my shoes were worn at the heels, and my hair, no matter what I did with it, refused to cooperate. I wasn't the popular kid. I wasn't the athlete. I was just Daniel, the quiet boy who sat in the back of AP chemistry and got straight A's while everyone else copied his homework and forgot his name by lunchtime. But I had worked up every ounce of courage I possessed to write that note. Hey, Melissa, I've liked you for a long time. Would you want to go to the winter formal with me? Daniel. Simple. Honest. Terrifying. I watched her unfold it, watched her eyes scan the words. And then, I will never forget this as long as I live. She laughed. Not a small, surprised laugh. A real one. The kind that travels. She turned to her friend Jessica, whispered something, and they both looked at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. Daniel, Melissa said, folding the note back up and handing it to me like it was something dirty. That's really sweet. But no, I just know. Then she walked away, her designer sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, her perfect ponytail swinging behind her. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably only 5 seconds. Then I walked to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and stared at the ceiling until I could breathe normally again. That was the first time I understood something important about life, that the world is not fair, and it does not care about your feelings. But here's the thing about quiet, determined people. We don't forget, and we don't stop moving. My name is Daniel O'Kafer. I grew up in a small apartment on the east side of the city with my mother, who worked two jobs, and my younger sister, who I helped with math homework every night at the kitchen table. We didn't have much, but my mother had a saying she repeated so often it became the background music of my childhood. Baby, the world will underestimate you. Let them. Just keep building. So I built. I studied harder than anyone I knew. I got a full scholarship to State University. I graduated top of my class in business administration. Then I went straight into corporate finance, starting at the very bottom, wearing secondhand suits and eating lunch at my desk every single day for 3 years. I was passed over for two promotions. I watched men with less skill and more confidence climb the ladder above me. I experienced the specific kind of quiet humiliation that comes with being the most capable person in the room and the least recognized. But I kept building. By 28, I had co-founded a tech consulting startup with my college roommate, Marcus. By 31, we had 12 employees and three major clients. By 34, the age I am when this story really begins, our firm, O'Kafer and Blake Consulting, had become one of the fastest growing mid-sized consulting companies in the region. I had a corner office on the 14th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows. I drove a car that would have made 17-year-old me dizzy. I wore suits that actually fit. I was not the boy in the worn-out shoes anymore. I want to be honest with you about something, because this story deserves honesty. I didn't think about Melissa very often. Not really. She wasn't some ghost haunting my ambitions. I didn't build my company to impress her or prove her wrong. Life is too short for that kind of motivation, and I had genuinely moved on. I had dated. I had loved people. I had been loved back, imperfectly, the way most of us are. Melissa was just a memory, a small, dusty one. Until the morning my assistant knocked on my office door and said, "Your 9 o'clock is here." The candidate for the senior client relations manager position. "Send them in," I said, without looking up from my laptop. I heard the door open. I heard heels on hardwood. And then something made me look up, some instinct, some flicker of the universe being dramatic, and I saw her. She was 34 now, just like me. Still beautiful, in that polished, carefully constructed way I remembered. Her hair was darker. Her eyes were sharper. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and holding a leather portfolio against her chest like a shield. She saw me at the exact same moment I saw her, and I watched the color drain from her face. She recognized me. I could see it happen in real time, the confusion, then the calculation, Then something I had never once seen on Melissa Carter's face in all the years I had known her. Fear. Daniel? She whispered. I leaned back in my chair slowly, clasped my hands together on the desk, and I gave her the most professionally neutral smile I had ever constructed in my life. Melissa, I said calmly, please, have a seat. She sat, and for the next 45 minutes, I conducted the most composed, thorough, and completely unreadable job interview of my career, giving absolutely nothing away about what was happening inside my chest. She was qualified, genuinely, impressively qualified. Her resume was strong. Her answers were sharp. She needed this job. I could sense it, the way you sense desperation when someone is working hard to hide it. When the interview ended and she stood to leave, she paused at the door. Daniel, I just want to say, we'll be in touch, I said, politely, professionally. Finally, she left. The door clicked shut behind her, and I turned back to my window, looked out at the city, and thought about something my mother used to say. Keep building, baby. Just keep building. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't possibly have known in that moment, was that hiring Melissa Carter would be the decision that changed absolutely everything. Not just for her, but for me too, in ways I never saw coming. I hired her. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Daniel, why? Why would you bring the girl who humiliated you at 17 into your company, into your space, into your daily life? Was it ego? Was it some buried desire for revenge you hadn't admitted to yourself yet? Honestly, I asked myself the same question the night after I made the decision. I sat in my apartment with a glass of water. I don't drink alcohol, never have. And I stared at her signed offer letter sitting on my kitchen counter like it was a grenade I had voluntarily placed there myself. The professional answer was simple. She was the best candidate. Her background in client relations was exactly what we needed as we prepared to expand into 3 new markets. Marcus had reviewed her resume before the interview and called it almost too good. She had managed portfolios worth millions. She had relationships with the kind of corporate clients we were trying to attract. On paper, hiring anyone else would have been a disservice to the company. But if I'm being completely honest with you, and I promised you honesty, there was something else. Something quieter and harder to name. A curiosity, maybe. The kind you feel when life drops an unexpected chapter in your lap and you want to see how it reads. I wanted to see who she had become. I wanted to understand the distance between the girl who had laughed at my note and the woman sitting across from me gripping that portfolio like her life depended on it. So I hired her, and I told myself it was purely professional. I was wrong, but I wouldn't find out how wrong for another few weeks. Melissa started on a Monday in early October. I had already spoken to my office manager, Claire, and made one thing very clear. Melissa was to be treated exactly like every other employee. No special treatment. No whispered backstory. As far as anyone in that office was concerned, she was simply the new senior client relations manager who came highly recommended. What I did not expect was how good she would be at the job from day one. She walked in that first morning like she had always worked there. She introduced herself to the team with warmth and confidence. She asked the right questions. She listened, really listened, in a way that made people feel seen. By the end of her first week, 3 of my junior staff members had independently come to me to say some version of the same thing. She's really impressive, Daniel. Great hire. I nodded each time and said, glad to hear it. And I meant it. I genuinely did. Whatever complicated feelings were living somewhere underneath my professionalism, I was not the kind of man who confused personal history with professional judgment. She was performing well. That was good for the company. But then came the first Thursday of her second week. We had a standing leadership meeting every Thursday at 11. Department heads, senior managers, myself, and Marcus. It was the kind of meeting where real decisions got made, and I had always run it with a direct, no nonsense energy. Melissa came prepared. Not just prepared, over-prepared. She had already identified 2 inefficiencies in our current client onboarding process and had drafted a 3-page proposal to fix them. She presented it clearly, confidently, without apology. The room was impressed. Marcus caught my eye across the table and gave me the smallest nod, the one that meant good call. After the meeting, as everyone filtered out, Melissa stayed behind. "Do you have 2 minutes?" she asked. I gestured to the chair across from me. She sat down, and for a moment she looked less like the polished professional and more like someone gathering herself for something difficult. "I want to address the elephant in the room," she said quietly. "There is no elephant," I said. "You're an employee. I'm your employer. We knew each other briefly a long time ago. That's the entire story as far as this office is concerned." She studied me for a moment. "You haven't changed as much as you think you have." That caught me off guard. I kept my expression neutral. "What does that mean?" "It means you're still the most disciplined person in the room," she said. "And you're still pretending things don't affect you when they do." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "Melissa," I said finally, "I appreciate the work you presented today. It was strong. Let's keep that momentum going." I opened my laptop, the universal signal that a conversation is over. She stood, smoothed her blazer, and walked to the door. Then she stopped, a habit of hers I was beginning to notice. "For what it's worth, Daniel, I'm sorry. For back then, I was a stupid teenager, and I was cruel, and I've thought about it more than you probably believe." She left before I could respond, and I sat there staring at my open laptop for a full 3 minutes without typing a single word. Here is where I need to tell you something important, something that changes the shape of this story. Melissa was married. I knew this from her onboarding paperwork. Married to a man named Richard Carter, she had taken his name for 6 years. There was a small diamond ring on her left hand that she wore every day. She mentioned him occasionally in casual office conversation the way married people do, naturally, without performance. She seemed, from the outside, like a woman who had built a stable life. But over the following 2 weeks, I began to notice things. Small things. The kind of things you only catch when you're paying attention. And despite everything I had told myself about professionalism and distance, I was paying attention. She took certain phone calls in the stairwell instead of her office. She sometimes came back from lunch with eyes that were slightly too bright, like she had been crying and fixed it before walking back to the door. And once, just once, I saw her sitting alone in the conference room after hours, staring at her phone with an expression I recognized immediately. It was the expression of someone whose world was quietly falling apart. And I had no idea yet just how far it was about to fall, or how violently it would pull me down with it. I want to tell you about the night everything cracked open. It was a Wednesday, late. The kind of late where the office building goes quiet in a way that feels almost sacred. No phones ringing, no keyboards clicking, just the low hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of the city moving on without you. I had stayed back to review contracts for a new client we were bringing on in January. It was the kind of detailed, solitary work I had always preferred doing after hours, when the building emptied and I could think without interruption. I had sent my assistant home at 6. By 8:30, I assumed I was completely alone on the 14th floor. I was wrong. I heard her before I saw her, a sound coming from the small kitchen at the end of the hall, not the sound of someone making coffee, but something quieter and more broken. I almost ignored it. I almost went back to my contracts and minded my own business the way I had trained myself to do my entire professional life. But something made me get up. I found Melissa sitting on the floor of the kitchen with her back against the cabinet beneath the sink. Her heels were off. Her blazer was folded neatly on the counter, even in falling apart. She was organized, I noticed, and she was holding her phone in both hands, staring at the screen with the specific stillness of someone who has just received news that rearranged their entire world. She looked up when she heard me. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked exhausted. "I'm sorry," she said automatically. "I'll go." "You don't have to go anywhere," I said. I leaned against the doorframe. "Do you want coffee? Or I think there's tea somewhere." She let out a sound that was half laugh, half something sadder. "Tea. Sure." I made the tea. I sat across from her, on the floor too, because it seemed like the right thing to do, like standing over someone who was hurting is its own kind of cruelty. And for a few minutes we just sat there with our cups and the silence. and I did not push. She started talking on her own. Richard is having an affair, she said. Flat, quiet, like she had been practicing saying it out loud and was trying to get used to the shape of the words. I didn't respond immediately. I let the sentence exist in the room. How long have you known? I asked. Suspected, 2 months. Known for certain. She glanced at her phone. About 40 minutes. She turned the screen toward me. I didn't want to look, but I did. It was a text thread, not from Richard, but forwarded from a number I didn't recognize. Photos. Messages. The kind of evidence that leaves no room for doubt, no mercy of ambiguity. Clear and devastating and absolute. I looked away. I'm sorry, Melissa. Don't be sorry, she said quietly. Be honest with me. Is this what it feels like? When someone you trusted completely just decides you aren't enough. Is this what you felt when I? She stopped herself, closed her eyes. I'm sorry. That's not fair. That's not the same thing at all. No, I said carefully. It's not the same thing. But pain has a way of making us reach for comparisons. It's okay. She opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in all the weeks she had worked here. Raw, unguarded, completely without the polish. I didn't come here tonight to fall apart in front of you, of all people, she said. I know, I said. This is mortifying. It really isn't. She almost smiled. Almost. She told me everything. Not all at once. It came out in pieces, the way truth usually does when someone has been holding it too tightly for too long. She and Richard had been struggling for 2 years. He was a sales director at a pharmaceutical company. Charming, well-dressed, the kind of man who was magnetic in a room full of strangers and emotionally absent in a house with his wife. She had tried counseling. He had agreed to 3 sessions and then found reasons to cancel every one after that. She had taken this job, our job, my company, because she needed financial independence. She had seen the writing on the wall before she was ready to read it out loud. She had been quietly preparing for an ending while still hoping she was wrong. She was not wrong. The woman, Melissa said, almost to herself, is someone from his office. She's 26. He's been seeing her for 8 months. She paused. 8 months, Daniel. I was decorating our apartment for Christmas while this was happening. I bought him a watch for our anniversary. I. She stopped, pressed her lips together hard. I did not tell her it would be okay. I have always hated when people say that. It reduces real pain to a problem waiting for a solution. Instead, I said, you don't have to hold it together right now. There's no one here. And those 8 words, were apparently the exact thing she needed to hear, because she put her face in her hands and she cried, really cried. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and accumulated, from months of sensing something wrong and being told you were imagining it. I sat there on that kitchen floor, and I did not move and I did not look away. I handed her paper towels because there were no tissues. I refilled her tea when it went cold. I told myself this was simply what a decent human being does for another human being in pain. I told myself my history with her had nothing to do with the way my chest felt tight sitting that close to her. I told myself a lot of things that night. What I did not tell myself, what I refused to examine in the honesty of that quiet kitchen, was the other thing I had discovered 3 days earlier. The thing I had been sitting on like a coal, waiting to see if it burned me. Because Melissa's husband, Richard? I knew him. Not well. Not personally. But his name had appeared in a document on my desk 72 hours ago. A document connected to a competing consulting firm that had been quietly attempting to poach 2 of our biggest clients for the last 4 months. Richard Carter worked for the pharmaceutical company, but on the side, in a capacity his wife clearly knew nothing about. He was a silent financial backer of the firm that was trying to dismantle everything I had built. My employee's cheating husband was also, quietly and deliberately, my enemy. And someone had made sure I found out about both things at almost exactly the same time. Which meant one terrifying thing. None of this was a coincidence. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table until 3 in the morning with 2 folders open in front of me. One was the client intelligence report my operations lead, James, had quietly handed me 4 days ago, flagging unusual patterns in two of our biggest accounts, subtle redirections, conversations that had gone slightly cold without explanation. The other was a printed copy of the corporate filing I had pulled myself after seeing Richard Carter's name buried in a footnote of a competitor's partnership disclosure. Blackwell Strategic Consulting. That was the firm. Newer than us, smaller than us, but aggressive in a way that had started to feel personal rather than competitive. They had approached our clients with pricing we couldn't match and inside knowledge of our proposals that they shouldn't have had. And there was Richard Carter, listed as a minority financial partner, tucked behind two shell entities that were clearly designed to make the connection difficult to find. Difficult, not impossible. I stared at his name for a long time. Then I thought about Melissa sitting on that kitchen floor, her face in her hands. The way she had said 8 months like the number itself was a wound. I thought about what it means when two devastating things arrive in your life at the same time from the same direction. In my experience, in business and in life, coincidences of that size don't exist. They are architecture. Someone builds them. The question was who and why now? The next morning, I called Marcus before I even got to the office. Marcus Blake is my business partner and one of the only people in my life I trust without reservation. We have known each other since our first week of college, two 18-year-olds from opposite sides of the city who ended up as roommates by random assignment and stayed brothers by choice. He is louder than me, funnier than me, and in certain important ways, smarter than me. Where I see patterns, Marcus sees people. Where I analyze, he reads rooms. I told him everything. The Richard Carter connection, the competitor link, the timeline. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted exactly 4 seconds, I counted, before Marcus said, "Daniel, who recommended Melissa for the position?" I opened my mouth. Then I closed it, because the answer hit me like cold water. Melissa had not applied through our normal recruitment channel. She had come through a referral, a professional contact who had emailed me directly, someone I respected, someone whose judgment I trusted, with a personal note saying she was exceptional and worth a conversation. That contact was a man named Franklin Webb, a senior partner at a firm we occasionally collaborated with, someone I had known professionally for 6 years and had never had a single reason to doubt. "Pull everything on Webb," I said. "Already opening my laptop," Marcus said. "I want to pause here and tell you something about how I was feeling during all of this. Because this story is not just about business and betrayal and corporate maneuvering. It's about something messier and more human than that. I was feeling two completely contradictory things at the same time, and I was disciplined enough to keep them separate, but only just. Professionally, I was cold and focused. Someone had constructed a situation designed to compromise my company. Whether Melissa was part of that construction or a pawn in it, I didn't yet know. And until I knew, I had to hold her at arm's length. I had to watch. I had to gather information before I moved. But personally, and this is the part one I'm least proud of, the part that made me most human and most vulnerable, I was scared. Not of Richard Carter or Franklin Webb or Blackwell Strategic. I was scared of the feeling that had been quietly growing in me since that night on the kitchen floor. I liked her, not the 17-year-old memory of her, not the idea of her. Her, the woman who came overprepared to every meeting and stayed late when she didn't have to and cried into paper towels on a Wednesday night and still managed to walk back through the office the next morning with her head up like the night before had not happened. I liked her, and I could not afford to. Not now. Maybe not ever. So I did what I have always done with feelings that complicate my thinking. I put them in a box. I closed the lid. I got back to work. Marcus found the thread in less than 48 hours. Franklin Webb had a financial relationship with Blackwell Strategic that predated our referral of Melissa by 14 months. It wasn't illegal on its own. A consulting world full of overlapping relationships rarely produces clean lines, but combined with everything else, the picture it painted was clear. Someone at Blackwell had identified our expansion plans. They had identified the gap in our client relations department. They had found Melissa, a genuinely talented professional who happened to have a personal connection to me through our shared history, and they had placed her. not necessarily with her knowledge, but placed her nonetheless. She was the inside connection they were hoping for, the relationship they were betting I would not be cold-blooded enough to manage with clear eyes. They had done their research on me. They knew about high school. They knew I was the kind of man who might let history soften his judgment. They had underestimated me. Again. But here is what they had not accounted for, what no one ever accounts for when they build a trap around a human being. Melissa was not who they thought she was either. Because the morning after Marcus showed me everything, I arrived at the office to find an envelope on my desk. No name on the outside, just my initials. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, in handwriting I did not recognize, were the names of three people, including Franklin Webb and Richard Carter, and a note that said only this: "They've been planning this for 8 months. I found out 3 weeks ago. I didn't know what to do. I still don't. But you deserve to know." I read that note 4 times. Then I set it down on my desk, very carefully, the way you set down something fragile that you are afraid of breaking further. I walked to my window. I looked out at the city, the same view I had earned through 15 years of relentless, unglamorous work, and I stood there until my breathing was steady. She knew. Melissa had known for 3 weeks. She had come into this office carrying that knowledge alongside everything else she was carrying: the failing marriage, the discovery of the affair, the weight of a situation she had been placed inside without her full consent. And she had said nothing, not because she was loyal to them, but because she was trying to figure out what the right thing to do actually was. I understood that paralysis. I had lived inside it myself at various points in my life. The moment when you know the truth, but don't yet know what the truth requires of you. She had figured it out. She had chosen me. I called her into my office at 9 that morning. I closed the door. I placed the note on the desk between us, and I watched her face when she saw it. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look afraid. She looked like someone who had made a decision and was prepared to stand behind it regardless of the consequences. "How long have you known about the connection to Blackwell?" I asked. Calm. Direct. 3 weeks, she said. "I found documents on Richard's laptop. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for our insurance renewal paperwork. But I saw the name O'Kafer and Blake in an email chain that had no reason to exist on my husband's computer." She paused. I read the whole thread. It took me about an hour to understand what I was looking at. It took me another 3 weeks to understand what to do about it. "You could have come to me immediately." "I know," she said. "I almost did. Twice. But I needed to understand something first." "What?" She looked at me steadily. "Whether you hired me because I was qualified, or because they told you to." The room went very quiet. "Melissa," I said slowly, "no one told me to hire you." "I know that now," she said. "It took me a while to believe it. But I watched you for 3 weeks, Daniel. I watched how you run this company, how you treat people, how you make decisions. And I realized you are exactly who you always were. Just louder now. Just with better shoes. Despite everything, despite the gravity of what we were sitting inside, I felt something loosen in my chest. "I need to know everything," I said. "Every name, every document you saw, every conversation you can remember. Can you give me that?" "I already wrote it all down," she said. And she reached into her bag and placed a folded set of papers on the desk next to the note. "I've been writing it down for 2 weeks, waiting until I was sure." What followed was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. There were no confrontations in parking lots, no screaming matches, no satisfying moment where I looked Richard Carter in the eye and watched him crumble. Real justice, the kind that actually holds, is quieter than that. It is methodical and patient, and it arrives wearing a suit. Marcus and I spent the next 3 weeks working with our legal team and a digital forensics consultant we brought in under strict confidentiality. We documented everything: the client's solicitation strategy, the internal proposal data that had been leaked, and we traced that leak not to Melissa, but to a junior analyst who had been recruited by Blackwell 6 months earlier and had been feeding them information from the inside without understanding the full scope of what he was participating in. He was barely 23. We handled him quietly and separately. For Richard Carter and Franklin Webb, we built a case that we handed to our attorneys with instructions to pursue every available civil remedy. The damage to our client relationships was recoverable. We got ahead of it by going directly to those clients with transparency and a presentation that demonstrated exactly what had been done and how. Two of them actually deepened their contracts with us afterward. People respect honesty when they're not used to receiving it. Blackwell Strategic Consulting did not survive the exposure. When the details of their methods became known in the industry, and in this business, details always become known, their credibility collapsed within a quarter. They were gone before the following summer. Richard Carter lost more than his scheme. Melissa filed for divorce 8 days after she put that note on my desk. She moved out of their apartment and into a short-term rental on the north side of the city. She handled it with the same quiet, organized precision she brought to everything else, her blazer neatly folded, her shoes lined up by the door, her grief kept private and processed on her own terms. I gave her space. It was the only thing that felt right. She was my employee. She had just dismantled her marriage. The last thing she needed was her boss adding complexity to an already complicated season. We did not talk about anything personal for 2 months. And then one evening in late January, a Thursday, after another leadership meeting where she had been, as usual, the most prepared person in the room, she stopped by my office doorway. "Do you want to get dinner?" she asked. Simply, without performance. I looked up from my desk. "Not as my boss," she added, "just as Daniel, the boy who wrote me a very brave note a very long time ago, the one I didn't deserve." I was quiet for a moment. "I know a place," I said. "I am not going to tell you that dinner was the beginning of some perfect love story. Life is not structured that way, and I respect you too much to package this into something neater than it is. What I will tell you is that we talked for 4 hours. We talked about high school and ambition and loneliness and the specific kind of growing up that happens when the world refuses to be kind to you early on. We talked about mistakes, hers, mine, the ones we made alone, and the ones the world made on our behalf. At the end of the night, standing on the pavement outside the restaurant in the cold January air, she looked at me and said, 'I spent 17 years becoming someone I thought I needed to be. I think I'm only now figuring out who I actually am.' That's not a bad place to start," I said. She smiled, a real one, the kind I had never seen from her before, unguarded and a little uncertain and completely genuine. "Here is what I know about life after living 34 years inside it. The world will underestimate you. People will laugh at your note and walk away on squeaky shoes and make you feel like you are too small for the spaces you dream about. And you will have a choice in those moments, to shrink or to build. I built, not to impress anyone, not for revenge, not even for Melissa. I built because my mother told me to, and because I believed her, and because the boy in the worn-out shoes deserved to become someone he could be proud of. Everything else, the corner office, the justice, the quiet January dinner, those were not the reward for the building. They were simply what was waiting on the other side of it. And sometimes, if you are patient enough and honest enough and brave enough to keep going when the hallway is empty and your heart is broken and your shoes are worn at the heels, sometimes the story ends better than you ever wrote it in that folded note. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, whatever hallway you're standing in right now, whatever note you're afraid to hand over, keep building. We'll see you in the next one.